My name is Kayla Bennett. I'm 34 years old, and 2 hours after my father's funeral, my brother stood up in front of our entire family and said, "Kayla stole Dad's $280,000 life insurance policy." For a moment, I could not breathe. My father's flowers were still on the dining table. His coat was still hanging by the front door. His favorite coffee mug was still beside the sink because none of us had been brave enough to move it. My younger sister Molly sat beside me on the couch, holding the stuffed rabbit Dad had bought her when she was a child. Molly was 27, but because of her developmental disability, grief reached her differently. She knew Dad was gone. She knew the house felt wrong. She knew people were whispering, but she did not understand why my brother Eric was standing in the middle of the room, pointing at me like I had robbed a dead man. "Dad trusted you," Eric said, his voice shaking in a way that made people believe him. "And you used that trust to change the policy." Everyone turned toward me. My Aunt Susan covered her mouth. My cousin Daniel stared at the floor. My mother's sister whispered, "Oh, Kayla." I looked at my brother and said, "I didn't change anything." Eric laughed once, bitter and wounded. "Then why is the insurance company saying you're the primary beneficiary?" That was the first time I heard it said out loud. Primary beneficiary. I knew Dad had updated his policy before he died. I knew because he told me he was making arrangements for Molly's care. But I did not know the full amount. I did not know he had listed me as the person in charge. And I definitely did not know Eric would turn that decision into a crime scene before the funeral food was even cold. "Dad made his own decision," I said. Eric stepped closer. "Dad was sick. He had cancer. He was not confused. You were with him at every appointment because you weren't." The room went silent after that. Eric's face changed. He had not expected me to say it. For years, my family had treated his absence like weather. Inconvenient, disappointing, but never his fault. If Eric missed a hospital appointment, he was overwhelmed. If I missed a phone call, I was cold. If Eric forgot to bring Molly's medication, he had a lot on his mind. If I asked for help, I was controlling. That day, Eric had counted on me being the same daughter I had always been, the one who swallowed the sharp things so everyone else could keep eating. Then a week later, we sat in a conference room at Midland Mutual Insurance, and the claims agent opened my father's file. Eric came in confident. He brought Aunt Susan with him. He brought Daniel. He even brought Molly, because he said she deserved to know the truth, though I think he only wanted her there so I would look cruel if I defended myself too strongly. The claims agent, a calm woman named Mrs. Harper, listened to Eric accuse me of manipulation, pressure, and theft. Then she opened a digital file and said, "Before Mr. Bennett changed the beneficiary, we recorded his verification call, as required for a policy of this value." Eric's face went still. Mrs. Harper looked at me. "Ms. Bennett, would you like us to play it?" I nodded, though my hands were shaking. She pressed play. My father's voice filled the room, tired, weak, but completely clear. "Do not give Eric control of this money," Dad said. "Kayla is the only one who protected Molly." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And by the time the recording ended, everyone finally understood one thing. I had not stolen my father's life insurance. My father had protected it from my brother. Before my father got sick, our family had a routine that looked normal from the outside and exhausting from the inside. Dad's name was Thomas Bennett, and he was the kind of man people trusted immediately. He had worked as a building inspector for 31 years. He noticed cracked foundations, loose railings, cheap wiring, and people who smiled too much when hiding something. He was quiet, practical, and not easily impressed. When I was little, I thought that made him distant. When I got older, I realized he loved by showing up with a tool bag, a full gas tank, or an envelope of cash he pretended was nothing. My mother died when I was 19. After that, Dad became both parents, badly, but faithfully. He burned pancakes, forgot school picture day, and once packed Molly a lunch with nothing but 3 yogurts and a spoon, but he never disappeared. Eric was 22 then, already dramatic, already charming, already convinced life owed him a softer landing. I was 19, working part-time and taking community college classes. Molly was 12 and needed structure, patience, and people who did not treat her like a burden. After Mom died, Molly started sleeping with the hallway light on. Dad would sit outside her door every night until she fell asleep. Eric said it made him too sad to watch. I watched anyway. That became the pattern. Eric felt things loudly. I handled them quietly. He cried at Mom's funeral so hard people held him up. I signed the death certificate paperwork because Dad's hands were shaking. Eric posted a long tribute online. I took Molly to therapy. Eric told people family meant everything. I learned what Molly's panic attacks looked like before they started. None of that made Eric evil. Not then. He loved Mom. He loved Dad. He loved Molly in the way people love someone when love does not ask for too much. He brought her birthday gifts. He made her laugh. He called her Malls and let her choose the radio when they were in the car. But Eric's love had limits, and those limits always appeared when responsibility got boring. Bills were boring. Medication schedules were boring. Doctor's forms were boring. Sitting through Molly's speech therapy was boring. Making sure she had clean clothes, signed forms, safe transportation, and someone patient enough to explain grief 3 times in one afternoon was boring. So those things became mine. Dad saw more than he said. He would watch me remind Molly to take her anxiety medicine, while Eric told a story at the dinner table and everyone laughed. He would see me wash dishes, while Eric took credit for bringing dessert he had bought with Dad's money. Sometimes, after Eric left, Dad would say, "You shouldn't have to carry so much." I would shrug. Somebody has to. He hated that answer. I know that now. At the time, I thought he was just tired. When Dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, Eric arrived at the hospital wearing a suit, though he had no meeting to attend. He hugged Dad and said, "We're going to fight this." Dad smiled faintly and said, "I'm the one with cancer, son. You can sit down." I almost laughed. Even sick, Dad could cut through theater. The doctors explained treatment options. I took notes. Eric asked one question about prognosis, then stepped into the hallway because he said he needed air. Dad watched him go, then looked at me. "Don't let him make this about his feelings," he said quietly. I said, "Dad." He closed his eyes. "I'm serious, Kayla." I wish I had understood then that he was not only talking about the cancer. Cancer changed our house into a calendar. Treatment days, lab days, scan days, bad days, worst days. Small good days we tried not to trust too much. Dad lived in the same brick house he had bought with my mother when Eric was a baby. I lived 10 minutes away, close enough that every emergency could become mine. Eric lived 40 minutes away with his wife Jenna and their 2 boys. He said distance made things difficult. I never pointed out that the highway worked in both directions. At first, everyone promised to help. Aunt Susan said she would bring meals every Thursday. Cousin Daniel said he could drive Dad to treatment if needed. Eric said he would handle the financial side, a phrase that should have frightened us more than it did. I handled the medical binder. I tracked medications, side effects, insurance approvals, pharmacy refills, and every question Dad forgot to ask once he was in the exam room. I also handled Molly. She did not understand cancer in one clean explanation. She understood it in pieces. Dad is sick. Dad is tired. Dad may lose his hair. Dad has to go to the hospital. Dad still loves you when he sleeps all afternoon. Dad may not get better. That last one took months. Every time she asked, "But after Christmas he'll be better, right?" Something inside me folded. Eric came on Sundays when he could. He brought coffee, sat with Dad for an hour, made Dad laugh, took a photo with Molly, and left before medication sorting. Then he told relatives he had spent the day helping. I let it go because I did not have energy to correct him. Letting things go can become a habit, and habits can become cages. About 5 months into Dad's treatment, I noticed money missing from his checking account. Not a huge amount at first, $500 here, $800 there. A cash withdrawal I knew Dad had not made because he had been too weak to leave the house. I asked Dad carefully. He looked embarrassed. I helped Eric. My stomach sank. With what? Business issue. Eric had started a small construction supply business 2 years earlier. It always seemed one payment away from turning around. Dad continued. He said it was temporary. Temporary was Eric's favorite word for money leaving someone else's account. I said, "Dad, you need your savings." He waved a hand. He has kids. I looked toward the living room, where Molly was coloring at the coffee table. So do you. Dad's face changed. He knew what I meant. Molly was not a child, but she would need support for the rest of her life. Mom had known that. Dad knew that. Eric seemed to remember only when it helped him look compassionate. Over the next few months, I learned Dad had given Eric far more than he admitted. Credit card payments, business rent, a truck repair, a tax penalty. Then one night, after a brutal chemo session, Dad asked me to bring him his old metal file box from the closet. He was sitting in his recliner with a blanket over his knees, looking thinner than he had the week before. I need to fix something, he said. I set the box on the coffee table. What? He opened it slowly and pulled out a folder labeled insurance. Your mother and I bought this policy years ago. I kept it mostly for Molly. I looked at him. Okay. He tapped the folder. Eric thinks it's for him. My throat tightened. Did he say that? Dad gave me a tired smile. He didn't have to. Then he looked toward the hallway where Molly's room was. I need you to promise me something. I already knew I would hate the promise. What? Dad said, if I'm not here, Molly comes first. Not Eric's pride, not family pressure. Molly. I said, I promise. He nodded. Then tomorrow we call the insurance company. The beneficiary call happened on a Wednesday afternoon. I remember because Dad insisted on shaving first. He said if he was going to make a serious decision, he did not want to look like a haunted broom. I helped him sit at the kitchen table. Molly was at her day program, and for once, the house was quiet. Dad had the policy paperwork in front of him, his reading glasses low on his nose, and a mug of tea he barely touched. I dialed the insurance company and put the phone on speaker. The representative transferred us to the claims and policy department. Then another representative came on the line. She explained the verification process, recorded consent, beneficiary change terms, and what it meant to name someone as primary beneficiary. Dad listened carefully. He was weak, but he was not confused. He asked questions. He corrected his address. He confirmed his birth date. He gave his policy number without looking at me. When the representative asked why he wanted to update the beneficiary, he took a long breath. I have a daughter with lifelong care needs, he said. Molly Bennett. The money is for her stability. The representative asked if he wanted Molly named directly. Dad said no, because Molly could not manage funds alone, and direct inheritance could affect support services. He had researched that. I had helped, but he had understood it. He said, I want Kayla Bennett listed as primary beneficiary and manager of the funds. She knows Molly's needs. My eyes filled. I looked away so he would not see. The representative asked if he was being pressured by anyone. Dad actually laughed. It was a small, dry laugh. My daughter Kayla is trying to talk me into resting instead of doing paperwork, he said. That's the only pressure. Then his voice changed. He sounded more serious than I had heard in weeks. I do not want my son Eric controlling this money. I looked back at him. He stared at the phone as if Eric were inside it. The representative asked if he wanted to add a note to the file. Dad said yes. Eric has already borrowed heavily from me. I love my son, but he should not manage funds meant for Molly. My heart was pounding. It felt wrong to hear Dad say it so plainly. It also felt like air entering a room that had been closed for years. After the call, Dad signed the physical confirmation forms and asked me to mail them certified. I did. I kept the receipt because paperwork had become the language of survival. Dad leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He'll be angry, he said. I did not pretend not to know who he meant. Eric? Dad nodded. He thinks love means trust. Sometimes love means not handing someone the matchbook. I sat across from him. Do you want to tell him? Dad opened his eyes. No. Dad, he'll spend my last months trying to change my mind. I could not argue with that. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. His hand felt cold and fragile, but his grip was still Dad's. Kayla, listen to me. When I'm gone, they may tell you you're being selfish. They may say Molly is family, so everyone should decide together. But some people use the word family when they mean access. I started crying then, quietly at first, then not. He squeezed my hand. You'll want to keep peace. I nodded because he knew me too well. Don't buy peace with Molly's future. That became the sentence I would hold on to when everything fell apart. Dad died 14 weeks later, early on a Monday morning, while rain tapped against the bedroom windows. I was there. Molly was asleep in the next room. Eric had said he would come the night before, but one of his boys had a soccer event, and then it got late, and then he said he would come in the morning. Dad did not make it to morning. His last clear words were not dramatic. He looked at me around 2 a.m. and said, "Make sure Molly keeps the blue blanket. She likes the soft edge." That was my father. Even at the end, practical love. I called Eric at 5:18 a.m. He did not answer. I called Jenna. She answered on the second ring, and I heard Eric in the background asking who it was. When she told him, he took the phone. I said, "Dad's gone." There was a silence. Then Eric made a sound like he had been struck. I felt sorry for him. I still did. Grief does not care whether someone has been responsible. It arrives anyway. The funeral was 4 days later. Eric cried hard at the service. He gave a speech that made people cry, talking about Dad teaching him to throw a baseball, fix a tire, and be a man. He did not mention the missed appointments. He did not mention the borrowed money. He did not mention Molly, not once. I sat beside Molly and held her hand while she rocked slightly in the pew. She whispered, "Dad went to Mom?" I said, "Yes." I hoped it was true. After the burial, everyone came back to Dad's house for food. Casseroles, cold sandwiches, coffee, pie, and the strange buzz of people who do not know whether to talk about death or weather. Molly sat on the couch with her rabbit. I moved through the room thanking people because someone had to. Eric stood near the fireplace, receiving sympathy like a second inheritance. At first, I thought the day would end quietly. Then Aunt Susan asked Eric if Dad had left any instructions about the house, accounts, or Molly's care. Eric looked at me, not sadly, not confused, strategically. "Actually," he said, "there's something everyone should know." My stomach dropped. He stepped into the middle of the living room. "I wasn't going to do this today," he said, which meant he absolutely was going to do it today. "But I found out this morning that Dad's life insurance was changed." People turned. My hand tightened around the plate I was holding. Eric continued, "It was $280,000, and Kayla is the beneficiary." A murmur moved through the room. Aunt Susan looked at me, shocked. I said, "Dad made that decision." Eric's voice broke. "He was dying, Kayla. He was clear. You were with him every day. You controlled everything." The room shifted. It was subtle, but devastating. The same people who had thanked me for caring for Dad were now wondering if care had given me opportunity. Eric saw it and pushed harder. "Dad always said everything should be equal. Then suddenly Kayla is in charge of the money? The money meant for all of us?" I said, "It was meant for Molly." Eric pointed toward Molly and she flinched. "Don't use her as an excuse." Something inside me went cold. "Do not point at her." Aunt Susan stood. "Everyone calm down." Eric looked at her. "No, Aunt Susan. People need to know. Kayla manipulated Dad and stole the policy." Molly began to cry, softly at first, then louder. I went to her immediately. Eric kept talking behind me. "If she did nothing wrong, she won't mind going to the insurance company and proving it." I looked over my shoulder. "Fine." Eric blinked. He had expected fear. He got permission. I said, "Schedule it." The week between the funeral and the insurance meeting was miserable. Eric called relatives. I know because they called me afterward with voices full of concern and suspicion. Aunt Susan said, "Honey, I'm not saying you did anything wrong, but you have to admit it looks complicated." Cousin Daniel said, "Maybe the fairest thing is to split it and avoid court." Eric's wife Jenna sent a message that said, "The boys lost their grandfather too." Everyone had a reason the money should become less about Molly and more about peace. I stopped answering after the third call. Instead, I focused on Molly. She had nightmares after the funeral lunch. She asked if I was going to jail. I knelt in front of her and asked who said that. She looked down and said, "Eric said stealing is jail." I felt rage so sharp I had to stand up and walk into the kitchen before I spoke. When I came back, I said, "I did not steal anything. Dad made a plan to help take care of you." She held her rabbit tighter. "Eric mad?" "Yes." "You mad?" I sat beside her. "A little." She leaned against me. "Don't go jail." I kissed her hair. "I'm not going anywhere." The insurance meeting was scheduled for Friday morning at Midland Mutual's downtown office. Eric insisted Aunt Susan come as family witness. Daniel came too. Jenna stayed home, which told me she either trusted Eric completely or did not want to watch him lie. Molly wanted to come because she thought decisions about Dad should include her. I hesitated, but then I remembered everyone used her name when they wanted money. Maybe she deserved to hear the truth too, in a way she could understand. The claims agent, Mrs. Harper, greeted us in a conference room. She was maybe 50, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of professional calm that comes from dealing with grief and money in the same hour. She began by explaining that life insurance beneficiary disputes were handled through documented review. Eric interrupted almost immediately. "My father was pressured." Mrs. Harper folded her hands. "We will review the file." Eric leaned forward. Kayla had access to everything. She took him to appointments. She controlled his mail. She could have had him sign anything. I said, "I did not make Dad sign anything." Eric ignored me. "He was on medication. He had cancer. He wasn't himself." Mrs. Harper clicked through the file on her laptop. Mr. Bennett completed the beneficiary change by recorded phone verification, followed by signed written confirmation. Eric looked momentarily surprised. Recorded? Yes, Mrs. Harper said. For policies above a certain threshold, when a beneficiary change is made during serious illness, our department often records a verification call to confirm intent and capacity. Aunt Susan shifted beside me. Daniel sat up straighter. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. I had been there during the call, but I had forgotten it was recorded. Or maybe grief had buried that fact under everything else. Mrs. Harper looked at me. Ms. Bennett, since you are the named beneficiary and Mr. Eric Bennett is formally disputing the change, I can play the relevant section for the parties present. Eric said quickly, "Yes, play it." He still sounded confident. That was the last moment he did. Mrs. Harper pressed play. At first there was static, then the representative's voice, then Dad's. Thin, tired, unmistakable. "My name is Thomas Edward Bennett," he said. Molly grabbed my hand. The room stopped moving. Dad's recorded voice filled the conference room, and everyone became still in the strange way people do when the dead speak clearly. The insurance representative asked him to confirm his policy number, address, date of birth, and the last 4 digits of his social security number. Dad answered each question correctly. Eric stared at the table. Mrs. Harper did not pause. The representative asked, "Mr. Bennett, are you requesting this beneficiary change voluntarily?" Dad said, "Yes." "Is anyone pressuring you to make this change?" Dad gave that small, tired laugh I remembered. "No. Kayla is sitting here telling me to drink tea and stop doing paperwork. That's the only pressure." Aunt Susan looked at me. Her face had softened, but I did not look away from the laptop. The representative continued, "You are naming Kayla Bennett as primary beneficiary, is that correct?" Dad said, "Yes." "Can you explain the purpose of this change?" There was a pause. Then Dad said, "My younger daughter, Molly, needs lifelong support. She cannot manage money on her own. Kayla understands her care, her doctors, her routine, and what she needs when she panics. I want Kayla to use this money for Molly's stability." Molly made a small sound beside me. I squeezed her hand. The representative asked, "Do you want any portion assigned to your son, Eric Bennett?" Eric lifted his head then, like he was bracing for a blow. Dad's voice came again. "No." 1 syllable, quiet, final. The room felt smaller. The representative asked if he wanted to add a note. Dad said, "Yes, I love my son, but Eric has already borrowed heavily from me, and he should not control funds meant for Molly." Eric's face went red. "That's private," he snapped. Mrs. Harper paused the recording. "Mr. Bennett, this review concerns a formal dispute. Your father's stated reason is relevant." Eric leaned back, breathing hard. He was angry when he said that. I looked at him. "Were you angry when you took $43,000 from him?" The words came out before I planned them. Aunt Susan gasped. Daniel said, "What?" Eric turned on me. Don't what? Tell the truth?" Mrs. Harper looked from Eric to me. "There are financial notes in the file referencing prior transfers." She opened another section. "Mr. Bennett submitted bank records during his verification process to support his decision." Eric's mouth opened, then closed. He had not known Dad sent records. Neither had I. Mrs. Harper turned the screen. There they were. Transfers from Dad's account to Eric over 18 months. $5,000, $7,000, $12,000, $3,000, cashier's check, business account payment, truck loan assistance, total documented, $43,600. Aunt Susan whispered, "Eric." He looked trapped now, and trapped men often become cruel. "He gave that to me." "Yes," I said. "And you still stood at his funeral and called me greedy." Eric slammed his palm on the table. Molly flinched. I stood instantly. "Do not scare her." Mrs. Harper's voice sharpened. "Mr. Bennett, if you cannot remain calm, we will end this meeting." Eric looked at Molly, then away. Molly's eyes were full of tears. She whispered, "Dad said Kayla helps me." I knelt beside her chair. "Yes." She looked at Eric. "Why you mad?" Eric had no answer that a decent person could say in front of her. Mrs. Harper resumed the recording. The final part was Dad's voice again. "If Eric challenges this, play this call. Kayla will try to keep peace. Don't let her give away Molly's future just because people yell." My throat closed. Even dying, Dad had known me. The recording ended. No one moved. Then Aunt Susan began to cry. After the recording ended, the room felt completely different. Not healed, not peaceful, just stripped of the story Eric had brought in. He had entered as the wounded son. Now, He was the man Dad had warned the insurance company about by name. Aunt Susan wiped her face with a tissue and looked at me. "Kayla," she whispered, "I am so sorry." I nodded once, because if I tried to speak kindly in that moment, I might break. Daniel looked angry in a quiet way. "Eric, you told everyone she manipulated him." Eric pushed back from the table. "I believe she did." "No," I said. "You hoped they would believe it before anyone heard Dad." He glared at me. "You think you're so noble because you took care of him. I don't think taking care of Dad made me noble. I think accusing me at his funeral made you cruel." Aunt Susan covered her eyes. Molly leaned into me, overwhelmed. Mrs. Harper explained the next steps. The dispute would be closed unless Eric filed formal legal action. Based on the recorded verification, signed documents, and supporting notes, the insurer recognized Dad's beneficiary change as valid. The payout would be released to me according to the policy terms. She also explained beneficiary responsibility did not legally require me to use the money for Molly unless Dad had placed it in a formal trust, which he had not. That part made Eric look up. For half a second, I saw hope in his face. He thought legal technicality might become moral leverage. I turned to him before he could speak. "I'm putting it into a special needs trust for Molly." Mrs. Harper nodded. "That would be a common planning option. You'll want an attorney." "I already called one," I said. I had called the day after the funeral, before Eric's accusation, because Dad had asked me to. Eric laughed bitterly. "Of course you did." "Yes," I said, "because Dad planned ahead." The meeting ended with paperwork. That is how life-changing moments often end. Sign here, initial there, take this copy, expect a letter in 7 to 10 business days. We walked out of Midland Mutual into bright afternoon sun. Aunt Susan tried to hug me. I let her, but I did not melt into it. She whispered, "I should have known better." I said, "Yes." She pulled back, surprised. Not angry, just surprised that I had not softened it for her. Daniel apologized too. "I believed Eric because he sounded so sure," he said. I said, "That's how he works." Eric came out last. He stood near his car, jaw tight, eyes red. "Kayla," he said. I helped Molly into my passenger seat before turning to him. "What?" He looked at the ground. "I shouldn't have said it at the funeral." "No," I said. "You shouldn't have said it at all." His face hardened. "You're really going to keep all of it?" I stared at him. "There it is. I have kids. Molly has needs. She's not your child." That was the moment Aunt Susan slapped him. Not hard enough to hurt him badly. Hard enough to stop the world for one clean second. Eric stared at her, shocked. Aunt Susan's hand trembled. "She is your sister," she said. Eric looked around like the whole parking lot had betrayed him. Then he got into his car and drove away. Molly watched him leave through the window. "Eric mad," she said softly. I got into the driver's seat and started the car. "Yes." "Dad mad?" I looked at her. "No, Malls. Dad made a plan." She held her rabbit against her chest. "Dad's smart." I smiled through tears. Yes, Dad was very smart. The days after the insurance meeting were quieter than I expected, and somehow that made them harder. I had spent so much energy bracing for attack that silence felt suspicious. Eric did not call me for 4 days. Jenna sent one message that said, "I don't know what Eric told me and what's true anymore." I replied, "Start with Dad's recording." She did not answer. Aunt Susan called every evening to check on Molly, and every time she apologized again until I finally said, "Aunt Susan, I can't keep accepting the same apology. I need different behavior." She was quiet, then said, "You're right." To her credit, she changed. She started taking Molly to her art class on Tuesdays. She brought dinner without posting about it. She corrected Daniel when he said, "Eric messed up," by saying, "Eric lied." Specific words matter. Meanwhile, I met with an attorney named Marlene Price to create a special needs trust for Molly. She was direct, expensive, and worth every dollar. She explained how the insurance payout could be placed into a trust that would help pay for Molly's housing support, therapies, transportation, dental care, clothing, emergency needs, and quality of life expenses without carelessly disrupting benefits. Dad had been right. If the money had gone to Eric, it would have disappeared into emergencies with nice names. If it had come to Molly directly, it could have caused problems. In my hands, with legal structure, it could become what Dad intended, stability. Still, Signing those documents hurt. Every page reminded me Dad was gone. Every decision felt like talking to an empty chair. I wanted him there to tell me which option made sense. Then I realized he had already told me. Molly comes first. Eric finally came to the house 2 weeks after the meeting. I saw him through the front window, standing on Dad's porch with his hands in his pockets. He knocked once. I opened the door but did not move aside. "Can we talk?" he asked. He looked tired, less polished, more like the brother I remembered from childhood, before charm hardened into entitlement. I said, "On the porch." He glanced past me. "Is Molly here?" "No, art class." He nodded. We sat on the porch steps where Dad used to drink coffee on summer mornings. For a while, Eric said nothing. Then he said, "I was angry when Dad changed it." I looked at him. "You knew before the funeral?" He closed his eyes. That answered before he did. "I found a letter from the insurance company in Dad's papers. It confirmed the beneficiary update." My hands went cold. "So when you accused me, you already knew Dad had done it himself?" "I knew he changed it. I didn't know about the recording." That sentence told the whole story. He had not thought I was guilty. He had thought I could be cornered. "You used the funeral," I said. He rubbed his face. I panicked. "No, Eric. You calculated." He looked hurt. I did not care. "You stood in a room with Molly and told everyone I stole from Dad because you thought shame would make me split the money." His voice sharpened. "Would that be so terrible? I'm his son." "Then you should have acted like Molly's brother." He looked away. "I needed help." "You got $43,000 of help before Dad died." "My business was failing. So was Dad's body." That silenced him. The words hung between us, ugly and true. Eric's eyes filled. "I miss him." For the first time, I believed him fully. "So do I." "I hate that the last thing he did was protect money from me." My throat tightened. "Maybe the last thing he did was protect Molly for you too, because he knew you wouldn't survive the guilt of spending what she needed." Eric stared at me. Then he cried. Not theatrically, not loudly, just a man finally meeting the damage he had done. I did not comfort him. Some tears need to fall without being rescued. The Special Needs Trust was finalized 6 weeks after Dad's funeral. The check from Midland Mutual arrived on a Thursday morning in a plain envelope that looked too ordinary to carry so much weight. $280,000. People imagine money like that feels powerful. It did not. It felt heavy. It felt like hospital rooms, medication alarms, Dad's voice on a recording, Molly's hand in mine, and every meal he skipped near the end because food tasted like metal. I deposited it into the trust account with Marlene's help. I kept copies of everything, not because I expected another fight, though I did, because Dad had taught me that love needs structure when people get desperate. The first thing the trust paid for was not dramatic: dental work. Molly had needed it for months, and Dad had worried about it from his recliner. Then we arranged a part-time support aide who specialized in adults with developmental disabilities, then transportation to her art program, then a small emergency reserve. Ordinary things, necessary things. Dad would have liked that. Eric did not challenge legally. I think the recording scared him, or maybe Jenna did. I heard from Aunt Susan that Jenna made him sleep in the guest room after learning he had known about the beneficiary change before accusing me. Their marriage became quieter. His business closed by winter. For once, nobody asked me to fix it. Molly asked about Dad less often, but she talked to him more. She would sit by his photo and tell him about art class, about the new aide named Tasha, about how Eric was still grumpy. One afternoon she asked, "Dad give money to you?" I said, "Dad gave me a job." She thought about that. "For me?" "Yes." She nodded. "Kayla good at jobs." I laughed. "Thanks, Malls." Then she said, "Eric wanted Dad money?" I hesitated. Molly understood more than people gave her credit for, but she also deserved gentleness. Eric wanted some of it, but Dad said no? Yes. She looked at Dad's photo. Dad said Molly first. I started crying before I could stop myself. She patted my arm awkwardly. "Don't leak." That made me laugh through tears. 6 months after the funeral, we held a small memorial birthday dinner for Dad. He would have been 68. Aunt Susan came. Daniel came. Jenna came with the boys. Eric came too, after asking first. That mattered. He looked nervous walking into Dad's house. Molly saw him and said, "No yelling today." Everyone froze. Eric swallowed. "No yelling today." Dinner was simple. Pot roast, potatoes, green beans, Dad's favorite apple pie. After we ate, Eric stood near the fireplace. My body tensed automatically. He looked at me, then at Molly, then at the family. "I need to say something," he said. Aunt Susan looked ready to tackle him if needed. Eric continued. "At Dad's funeral, I accused Kayla of stealing the insurance money. That was a lie. The room went completely still. I knew Dad had changed the policy himself. I was angry. I wanted the money. I thought if I made Kayla look guilty, she would feel pressured to split it. His voice broke. I used Molly's name like I was protecting her, but Kayla was the one doing that. Molly looked at me. He said sorry? I whispered. He's trying. Eric turned toward me. I am sorry. Not because it didn't work, because it was wrong. That was the first apology that felt like it knew where to land. I nodded. Thank you. I did not forgive him that night. Forgiveness is not a light switch, but the truth had finally been said in the same kind of room where the lie began. That mattered. A year after Dad died, Molly and I visited his grave on a clear spring morning. We brought yellow flowers because he used to say roses were too dramatic and lilies looked like they were judging him. Molly brought a drawing from art class. In it, Dad was standing beside a blue house with 3 stick figures: me, Molly, and him. Eric was not in the picture. I did not ask why. Molly placed the drawing against the headstone and said, "Hi, Dad. Kayla does the job." I smiled, because that was true in more ways than she knew. The trust was working. Molly's care was steadier. I had learned to say no without writing a speech first. Aunt Susan had become helpful in practical ways. Daniel had stopped calling Eric's behavior a mistake and started calling it what happened. Eric and I were not close. Maybe we would never be. But he had started paying back small amounts to the estate account Dad had kept. Not because he was legally forced to, but because Marlene suggested restitution mattered if he wanted to rebuild trust. I did not praise him for it. Some things should be done without applause. Standing at Dad's grave, I thought about the insurance call again. His tired voice, his careful words, his final refusal to let the loudest person become the most trusted. Dad had not been perfect. He gave Eric too many chances. He let me carry too much. He saw the pattern late, but before he died, he did something about it. Not with a speech, with paperwork, with a recording, with one clear decision that survived grief, pressure, and accusation. My name is Kayla Bennett. I'm 34 years old. My family said I stole my father's $280,000 life insurance policy. My brother called me a thief 2 hours after Dad's funeral. He said I manipulated a dying man. He said I took what belonged to everyone. Then the claims agent played Dad's final verification call, and my father's voice told the truth. Do not give Eric control of this money. Kayla is the only one who protected Molly. That recording did not bring Dad back. It did not erase the funeral accusation. It did not instantly repair my family or turn Eric into the brother Molly deserved. But it gave the truth a voice when mine was not enough. Sometimes quiet justice is not revenge. Sometimes it is a dead man's careful plan outliving a living man's lie. Sometimes it is a disabled daughter getting the care her father intended. Sometimes it is a sister finally refusing to turn love into access. I used to think peace meant keeping everyone at the table, even if I had to sit there bleeding quietly. I do not believe that anymore. Peace without truth is just silence with better manners. Dad knew that before I did. So he left a recording. He left a policy. He left a responsibility I did not ask for, but would honor anyway. And when Eric tried to turn grief into a courtroom and family into a jury, Dad's voice walked back into the room and reminded everyone who had really been paying attention. Molly comes first. That was his final instruction. That is still my promise.